The morning of my wedding, my father texted me 3 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. "We're not coming." What they didn't know was that their absence would become the catalyst for the most beautiful moment of my life, orchestrated by a man who understood that love isn't about blood, it's about choice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee shop on 5th Street had become my second home during the months leading up to my wedding. Every Tuesday morning at 7:30 sharp, I would claim the corner table near the window, spread out my wedding planning materials, and methodically work through the endless checklist that seemed to grow longer rather than shorter with each passing week. The familiar rhythm of espresso machines and morning conversation provided the perfect soundtrack for what should have been joyful preparation. My name is Elena Vasquez, and at 28, I had built what most people would consider a successful life. I worked as a senior marketing coordinator for a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Portland, lived in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, and had managed to save enough money to pay for my own wedding without asking anyone for financial assistance. Independence had always been my survival mechanism, learned through years of navigating family dynamics that rarely felt stable or supportive. The wedding planning process had revealed uncomfortable truths about relationships I had spent decades trying to normalize. Each vendor meeting, each decision about flowers or music or seating arrangements had become an exercise in managing expectations that seemed impossible to satisfy. My family operated according to unspoken rules that shifted without warning, creating an atmosphere where approval felt conditional and love came with invisible price tags. Marcus Chen, my fiancé, represented everything I had learned to value through experience rather than instruction. He possessed a quiet strength that never demanded attention, a sense of humor that found light in difficult moments, and most importantly, a family that had embraced me without reservation from the moment we met. His parents, David and Helen Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan 30 years earlier, with engineering degrees and unshakable determination to build something lasting in their adopted country. David Chen's journey from immigrant engineer to technology entrepreneur had unfolded gradually, built on innovations in renewable energy systems that eventually revolutionized how commercial buildings managed power consumption. His company, Chen Dynamics, had grown from a small consulting firm operating out of their garage to an international corporation that employed thousands of people across 6 continents. The financial success had followed naturally from solving problems that mattered, creating solutions that improved how people lived and worked. Yet despite the wealth that accompanied his professional achievements, David remained remarkably grounded in the values that had sustained his family through early struggles. He arrived at the office before his employees, remembered the names of security guards and maintenance staff, and maintained the same Toyota Camry he had driven for 8 years because it served its purpose reliably. His success had not changed his character, but had simply provided him with greater capacity to express the generosity that had always defined his approach to relationships. Helen Chen balanced her husband's business focus with warmth that made everyone feel welcomed into their family circle. She had built a career as a pediatric nurse while raising Marcus and his younger sister, demonstrating daily that strength could be expressed through caring for others rather than dominating them. Her kitchen had become the gathering place for family celebrations, neighborhood potlucks, and informal dinners that often extended late into the evening as conversations meandered through topics ranging from politics to philosophy to the simple pleasures of sharing good food with people you cared about. The contrast between the Chin family dynamics and my own had become increasingly apparent as the wedding approached. Where my family communicated through implied criticism and conditional support, Marcus's family expressed affection through direct encouragement and unconditional presence. Where my relatives seemed to compete for attention and approval, his family celebrated each other's achievements without keeping score or measuring comparative success. My parents, Roberto and Carmen Vasquez, had built their identities around maintaining appearances that often contradicted the reality of their daily lives. My father worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, a position that provided middle-class stability, but never the executive status he believed he deserved. His frustration with his professional limitations often manifested as criticism of others' choices, particularly when those choices challenged his understanding of appropriate behavior or social expectations. My mother had sacrificed her own career aspirations to support my father's ambitions, a decision that created resentment she expressed through passive-aggressive comments and elaborate displays of martyrdom. She possessed remarkable organizational skills and genuine intelligence, but channeled those abilities into managing other people's lives rather than pursuing her own goals. Her love felt conditional, dependent on my ability to make choices that validated her decisions and reflected positively on her parenting. My younger brother Diego had learned to navigate family expectations by avoiding any behavior that might attract unwanted attention. He worked in information technology for a local hospital, lived alone in a modest apartment, and maintained friendly but superficial relationships with most family members. His strategy for family harmony involved agreement without engagement, presence without participation. He had mastered the art of being physically present while emotionally absent, protecting himself from the criticism that seemed to follow any expression of independent thought or personal preference. The extended family network included aunts, uncles, and cousins who had established their own versions of conditional love and measured support. Family gatherings resembled performance evaluations more than celebrations, with conversations focused on comparing achievements, analyzing failures, and maintaining hierarchies that had been established decades earlier. Success was measured by conformity to unspoken standards, rather than personal fulfillment or authentic happiness. Meeting Marcus had introduced me to the possibility that families could function as sources of strength rather than stress, encouragement rather than criticism, celebration rather than competition. His parents had welcomed me with genuine warmth from our first meeting, asking questions that demonstrated interest in my thoughts and experiences rather than judgment of my choices. They had never made me feel that I needed to earn their approval or prove my worthiness to be part of their son's life. The engagement process had highlighted these differences in stark relief. When Marcus proposed during a quiet evening walk through Washington Park, my first call had been to my parents, expecting them to share my excitement and joy. Instead, the conversation had quickly shifted to concerns about wedding costs, guest lists, and whether Marcus came from the questions focused on financial considerations and social implications, rather than celebrating the fact that I had found someone who made me genuinely happy. David and Helen Chen's response had been entirely different. They had invited us to dinner the weekend after the engagement, spending the evening asking about our hopes for marriage, sharing stories about their own wedding and early years together, and offering support in whatever form we might need. Their joy seemed genuine and uncomplicated, focused on our happiness rather than on managing appearances or controlling outcomes. The wedding planning process had become a constant navigation between these two approaches to family relationships. My parents provided opinions disguised as helpful suggestions, criticism presented as concern, and conditions wrapped in expressions of love. They questioned venue choices, criticized budget decisions, and expressed disappointment about guest list inclusions that did not align with their social priorities. Every conversation about wedding details became an opportunity for them to assert control over decisions that should have been mine and Marcus's to make. Meanwhile, the Chen family offered resources without strings, assistance without conditions, and support without judgment. When we mentioned considering a particular venue that exceeded our budget, David quietly arranged to cover the difference without making it feel like charity or creating obligation. When I expressed anxiety about coordinating vendors and timelines, Helen connected me with a wedding planner she knew personally who could manage details while respecting our preferences and vision. The invitations had been mailed 6 weeks before the ceremony, each envelope addressed by hand in calligraphy that Helen had insisted on paying for as her contribution to the celebration. The response cards had arrived steadily, creating neat piles of acceptances that represented friends and family members who wanted to witness and celebrate this important moment in our lives. The Chen family responses had arrived promptly with enthusiastic notes expressing excitement about the upcoming celebration. My family's responses had trickled in with minimal enthusiasm and several requests for changes to seating arrangements or meal preferences that suggested they viewed the wedding as an event to be endured rather than enjoyed. 3 weeks before the ceremony, my mother had called with what she described as important concerns about the wedding timeline and logistics. The conversation had begun with seemingly reasonable questions about parking and reception timing, but quickly evolved into a comprehensive critique of our choices. She questioned the wisdom of an outdoor ceremony, criticized the selection of flowers as too expensive, and suggested that the guest list included too many of Marcus's family members and not enough of our own relatives. The underlying message had become increasingly clear as these conversations accumulated over the months of planning. My family viewed the wedding as a reflection of their status and judgment, rather than a celebration of love and commitment between Marcus and me. Their concerns focused on how the event would be perceived by others, rather than whether it would create meaningful memories for the couple actually getting married. They seemed more interested in controlling the narrative than supporting the relationship. 2 weeks before the wedding, the tension had escalated during a family dinner that was supposed to be a celebration of the upcoming ceremony. My father had spent most of the evening questioning Marcus about his career plans, investment strategies, and long-term financial goals in ways that felt more like an interrogation than getting-to-know-you conversation. My mother had critiqued every aspect of the wedding plans that had been finalized, offering alternative suggestions that would have required starting the planning process over entirely. The evening had concluded with my father delivering what he clearly intended as wisdom about marriage, family obligations, and the importance of maintaining proper relationships with relatives who had, quote, been there long before Marcus came along. The underlying threat was unmistakable. Choosing Marcus and his family over my biological family's preferences would have consequences that extended far beyond the wedding day itself. Marcus had handled the evening with remarkable grace, responding to criticism with patience, deflecting hostile questions with humor, and maintaining his dignity while my family systematically attempted to undermine his worthiness as a partner. During the drive home, he had simply taken my hand and said, "Whatever happens, we're building something better together." His confidence in our relationship had provided the strength I needed to continue moving forward despite the increasing family pressure. The final week before the wedding had brought a series of increasingly dramatic phone calls, text messages, and emails from various family members, expressing concerns, offering advice, and making demands that seemed designed to create crisis rather than resolve concerns. My Aunt Sophia had called to suggest postponing the ceremony until my family could properly prepare for such an important occasion. My cousin Ricardo had sent a lengthy email explaining why outdoor weddings were inappropriate for serious couples who valued tradition and family approval. Each communication had felt like a test designed to measure my loyalty to family expectations versus my commitment to building a life with Marcus. The underlying message remained consistent across all these interactions. Choosing to marry Marcus according to our preferences rather than our families' demands represented a betrayal of relationships and obligations that should take precedence over personal happiness. The morning before the wedding, I had awakened with a mixture of excitement about marrying Marcus and dread about navigating the family dynamics that would inevitably surface during the ceremony and reception. The weather forecast predicted perfect conditions for our outdoor celebration, the vendors had confirmed their schedules, and the final details had been arranged with precision that should have created confidence and anticipation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instead, I found myself checking my phone repeatedly for messages that might signal another crisis, or demand from family members who seemed determined to transform our celebration into a battlefield for competing loyalties and expectations. The coffee shop had become my refuge during these final days, providing neutral territory where I could review plans and prepare mentally for what should have been the happiest day of my life. Marcus had suggested several times that we should focus on the people who truly supported our relationship and minimize our concern about those who seemed invested in creating problems rather than sharing joy. His approach to family relationships had been shaped by experiences with people who celebrated success rather than competing with it, who offered support rather than conditions, and who understood that love was expressed through encouragement rather than control. The night before the wedding, we had hosted a rehearsal dinner at a small restaurant near the venue, surrounded by friends and family members who had traveled from various locations to be present for our celebration. The Chen family had organized the evening with typical thoughtfulness, creating an atmosphere that felt intimate and joyful rather than formal or stressful. David had offered a toast that spoke about the joy of welcoming me into their family and the excitement of witnessing two people commit to building a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection. My family had attended the rehearsal dinner, but their participation had felt stilted and uncomfortable, as though they were fulfilling an obligation rather than celebrating an occasion they truly valued. The conversations had remained surface level, focused on logistics and superficial topics rather than the deeper significance of the commitment Marcus and I were making to each other. Their presence had created subtle tension that influenced the entire evening's atmosphere, despite the best efforts of other guests to maintain warmth and celebration. As I sat in the coffee shop on the morning of my wedding, reviewing the timeline one final time and confirming the last details with vendors, I realized that the months of planning had taught me as much about family relationships as they had about event coordination. The process had revealed which people in my life were genuinely invested in my happiness, and which were more concerned with maintaining control over my choices. It had demonstrated the difference between love that supported growth and love that demanded conformity to expectations that served others' needs rather than my own authentic development. The phone buzzed with a text message that would transform everything I thought I understood about the day ahead and the relationships that had shaped my understanding of love, loyalty, and family commitment. The text message arrived at exactly 8:47 in the morning, 3 hours before I was scheduled to begin getting ready for the most important day of my life. The phone buzzed against the marble surface of the coffee shop table, interrupting my final review of vendor contact information and ceremony timeline details. The sender identification displayed my father's name, but nothing could have prepared me for the 3 words that would fundamentally alter not just my wedding day, but my understanding of family loyalty and unconditional love. "We're not coming." I stared at the screen for several long moments, convinced that I had misread the message or that my phone had somehow corrupted the text during transmission. The words remained unchanged no matter how many times I blinked or adjusted my focus. Below those 3 devastating words, additional text appeared as I scrolled down to reveal the full scope of my father's communication. "Your mother and I have discussed this extensively, and we cannot in good conscience participate in a ceremony that disrespects our family values and traditions. The choices you have made regarding this wedding demonstrate a clear prioritization of your fiancé-fiancé's family over your own blood relatives. We raised you to understand the importance of family loyalty and proper respect for the people who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities in life. Diego agrees with our position and will also not be attending. We hope that someday you will understand why we made this difficult decision. Perhaps when you have children of your own, you will comprehend the pain of watching them choose strangers over the family that has always been there for them." The coffee cup trembled in my hands as I read through the message a second time, then a third, searching for some indication that this represented a negotiating tactic rather than a final decision. The clinical tone of my father's words carried no emotion, no regret, no acknowledgement that his choice to abandon his daughter on her wedding day might constitute the real betrayal of family values he claimed to defend. The coffee shop continued its normal rhythm around me while my world collapsed into the small screen of my smartphone. Customers ordered their morning beverages, baristas called out names for pickup, and conversations flowed in the comfortable cadence of people beginning their ordinary Tuesday routines. None of them could possibly comprehend that the woman sitting alone at the corner table had just received notification that her entire family had decided she was not worth showing up for on the most significant day of her adult life. I attempted to call my father immediately, but the phone rang directly to voicemail without even completing a full ring cycle. The recording invited callers to leave detailed messages, but promised no timeline for response. I tried calling my mother's phone with identical results, then my brother's number, which produced the same automatic redirection to voicemail. The coordinated nature of their unavailability suggested this decision had been planned and discussed extensively, with contingencies established to prevent any last-minute appeals or emotional manipulation that might undermine their collective resolve. The isolation felt complete and deliberate. In the span of 5 minutes, I had lost not just my parents' presence at my wedding, but my brother's support, the comfort of extended family connections, and the basic assumption that blood relationships provided some minimal level of unconditional commitment to show up for important life events. The message had transformed my wedding day, from a celebration supported by both families, into a stark demonstration of which people truly valued my happiness over their own pride and control. My first instinct was to call Marcus, but I realized that sharing this devastating news would transform his wedding morning into crisis management rather than joyful preparation. He was scheduled to spend the morning with his groomsmen at his parents' house, enjoying the traditional breakfast that Helen prepared for special occasions, and participating in the relaxed bonding rituals that his family had developed over years of celebrating important milestones together. The contrast between his morning experience and mine felt like a physical ache in my chest. I attempted to analyze my family's decision through the lens of rational problem-solving, searching for specific actions or decisions that had triggered such an extreme response. The wedding planning process had included multiple attempts to accommodate their preferences within the constraints of our budget and vision. We had adjusted the ceremony time to accommodate my father's work schedule, modified the menu to include dishes that reflected both cultural backgrounds, and reserved premium seating for family members, despite the additional expense involved in the upgraded venue package. The guest list had been carefully balanced to include equal representation from both families, even though the Chen family's natural expansiveness could have easily filled the entire venue with relatives, colleagues, and family friends who had genuine relationships with Marcus and expressed authentic enthusiasm about celebrating his marriage. My family's guest count had required stretching definitions of closeness to include cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, and family friends who barely remembered my name. Yet we had maintained parity because traditional expectations suggested equal representation demonstrated proper respect for both families. The ceremony itself had been designed to honor multiple cultural traditions without prioritizing one background over another. We had incorporated elements that reflected my Hispanic heritage alongside traditions that acknowledged Marcus's Taiwanese roots and his family's American immigrant experience. The officiant had been briefed on the importance of addressing both families during the service, acknowledging the sacrifices and contributions that had brought Elena and Marcus to this moment of commitment and celebration. Yet none of these accommodations had apparently satisfied my family's requirements for proper respect and priority treatment. Their decision to boycott the wedding suggested that no amount of consideration or inclusion would have been sufficient to overcome their fundamental objection to my choice of partner, and their perception that accepting the Chen family's generosity somehow diminished their own importance in my life. The motivations behind their ultimatum became clearer as I reflected on conversations from recent weeks. My father had repeatedly expressed discomfort with David Chen's success and the resources the Chen family could bring to support Marcus's and my future together. Rather than celebrating the fact that their daughter was marrying into a family that could provide stability and opportunities, my parents seemed to interpret this blessing as a personal insult that highlighted their own limitations and reduced their significance in my life. My mother's concerns had focused increasingly on appearances and social perceptions, particularly regarding how our extended family and community would interpret the wedding dynamics. She had expressed anxiety about other relatives, noticing the differences between our families, contributions to the celebration, the disparity in gift-giving capacity, and the potential for unfavorable comparisons that might reflect poorly on our family's status and success. Her pride had become more important than her daughter's happiness. Diego's participation in the boycott felt particularly devastating, because I had expected his natural conflict avoidance tendencies to keep him neutral in family disputes. His decision to align with our parents rather than maintain independent judgment about my wedding suggested that the family pressure had been intense and sustained. The promise of future family inclusion had apparently outweighed any loyalty he might have felt toward supporting his sister on her wedding day. The strategic timing of their announcement revealed the calculated nature of their decision. By waiting until the morning of the wedding to deliver this news, they had ensured maximum emotional impact while minimizing my ability to respond effectively or attempt to change their minds. The short notice prevented me from arranging alternative family representation or adjusting ceremony plans to accommodate their absence without creating obvious gaps and awkward explanations for other guests. Yet as I sat in that coffee shop processing the magnitude of their betrayal, I began to recognize something unexpected emerging alongside the grief and shock. The pain of their rejection was real and substantial, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of clarity about the relationships that truly mattered in my life. Their decision to abandon me had inadvertently freed me from the exhausting effort of trying to earn approval from people who had made their love conditional on my willingness to prioritize their comfort over my own authentic happiness. For months, I had been attempting to balance competing family expectations while planning a wedding that would satisfy multiple sets of priorities and preferences. The mental and emotional energy required to navigate these complex dynamics had often overshadowed the joy of preparing to marry the person I loved most. My family's withdrawal from the celebration meant that I could focus entirely on the people who genuinely wanted to witness and support our commitment to building a life together. The Chen family's consistent warmth and inclusion throughout the engagement process had demonstrated what unconditional family love actually looked like in practice. They had never made their support dependent on my ability to meet predetermined expectations or prove my worthiness through specific behaviors or choices. Their excitement about welcoming me into their family had been genuine and unwavering, expressed through actions that consistently reinforced their words of acceptance and celebration. David Chen's business success had never been wielded as a weapon to create obligation or indebtedness, but rather as a resource to enhance experiences and remove barriers that might prevent celebration. His offer to cover additional wedding expenses had been presented as a gift between family members rather than a transaction that created ongoing obligation. His approach to wealth demonstrated that resources could be used to build relationships rather than establish dominance or control. Helen Chen's nurturing presence had provided the maternal support I had been seeking from my own mother throughout the wedding planning process. Her enthusiasm for wedding preparations had been infectious and authentic, focused on creating meaningful memories rather than managing appearances or controlling outcomes. Her questions about my preferences and dreams had been genuine inquiries designed to better support my vision rather than challenges to my judgment or attempts to redirect my choices toward her own preferences. The contrast between these two approaches to family relationships had become increasingly stark during recent months, but my family's wedding morning abandonment had crystallized the differences in ways that eliminated any remaining ambiguity. One family had chosen to be present and supportive despite any personal reservations they might have harbored about specific wedding decisions. The other had chosen absence and punishment because their preferences had not been granted priority over the couple's own vision for their celebration. As I gathered my wedding planning materials and prepared to leave the coffee shop, I realized that my family's devastating message had inadvertently provided a gift of clarity and freedom that would transform my wedding day from an exercise in managing competing loyalties into a genuine celebration of the relationships that had proven their commitment through consistent actions rather than conditional words. The morning sun streamed through the coffee shop windows as I stood to leave, and I noticed that my hands were no longer trembling. The shock of my family's betrayal was evolving into something more powerful and productive. Their decision to prioritize pride over presence had removed the final obstacle to experiencing my wedding day with complete authenticity and joy. I walked toward my car with a strange sense of liberation alongside the undeniable pain of rejection. The family that had raised me had revealed the conditional nature of their love in the starkest possible terms. But the family I was joining had demonstrated unconditional commitment through months of consistent support, genuine interest, and authentic celebration of the love Marcus and I shared. The phone buzzed again with another text message, but this time the sender identification showed Helen Chen's name. The message read, "Good morning, beautiful daughter. I know today might feel overwhelming with last-minute details, but remember that you are surrounded by people who love you completely. David and I consider ourselves blessed to witness the beginning of your and Marcus's married life together. See you soon, for the most wonderful celebration." The timing of Helen's supportive message immediately following my family's abandonment felt like divine intervention, a reminder that family is defined by choice and commitment rather than biology and obligation. The woman who would become my mother-in-law in just a few hours had provided the emotional support and unconditional love that my biological mother had withheld. As I drove toward the venue to begin final preparations for the ceremony, I understood that my family's absence would create space for something more beautiful than their reluctant presence ever could have provided. Their empty seats would be filled with people who had chosen to celebrate love rather than enforce loyalty, who had prioritized joy over judgment, and who understood that weddings mark the beginning of new family structures built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The catalyst moment that had begun with devastating rejection was transforming into an opportunity for authentic celebration, surrounded by the people who had proven their commitment through actions rather than demands. My family had inadvertently given me the greatest wedding gift possible, the freedom to experience pure joy without the burden of managing their disapproval or accommodating their conditions. The road ahead led toward a ceremony that would be exactly what Marcus and I had envisioned, supported by people who genuinely wanted us to succeed and flourish together. Their absence had removed the final barrier to experiencing the day we had planned with complete authenticity and celebration. The bridal suite at the Willows estate had been transformed into a sanctuary of pre-wedding preparation, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens where our ceremony would take place in just 3 hours. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers while 2 professional stylists arranged their tools with military precision across marble countertops. The space should have radiated joy and anticipation, but I found myself staring at my reflection in the ornate mirror, unable to process the magnitude of the morning's revelation. Marcus's sister Jennifer had arrived 30 minutes earlier with arms full of coffee, pastries, and the infectious enthusiasm that characterized the Chen family's approach to celebrations. She possessed her brother's quiet confidence, combined with her mother's nurturing instincts, creating a presence that had become invaluable during the final weeks of wedding preparation. Her excitement about gaining a sister through marriage had been genuine and consistent, expressed through thoughtful gestures that demonstrated her investment in building a lasting relationship rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial obligations. "Elena, you seem unusually quiet this morning," Jennifer observed while arranging the delicate pearl hairpins that would secure my veil. "Pre-wedding nerves are completely normal, but you look like you've seen something disturbing. Did one of the vendors create a last-minute crisis that we need to resolve?" The concern in her voice reflected the protective instincts that had emerged naturally as our friendship deepened during the engagement period. Jennifer had appointed herself as my advocate and problem solver during moments when wedding planning became overwhelming, stepping into roles that my own family members had declined to fill. Her willingness to prioritize my emotional well-being over her own convenience had demonstrated the kind of sisterhood I had always hoped to experience but had never found within my biological family relationships. I realized that I had been unconsciously avoiding direct eye contact with anyone since arriving at the bridal suite, focusing instead on logistical details and surface-level conversations that prevented deeper emotional processing. The professional composure that had served me well in corporate environments was providing temporary protection against the full impact of my family's abandonment. But the facade was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as the ceremony approached. "My parents have decided not to attend the wedding," I said quietly, testing how the words would sound when spoken aloud for the first time. The simple statement felt inadequate to capture the complexity of emotions swirling beneath my carefully controlled exterior, but it represented the essential truth that would need to be addressed before we could proceed with final preparations. Jennifer's hands stilled in my hair as she processed this information. Her reflection in the mirror revealed genuine shock, followed by the kind of protective anger that emerges when someone you care about has been deliberately hurt by people who should have provided unconditional support. She set down the hairpin and turned to face me directly, abandoning the pretense of continuing with beauty preparations while such significant emotional territory remained unaddressed. "They decided not to come to your wedding?" she repeated, her voice carrying disbelief that any parent would make such a choice. "Elena, what possible reason could they have given for missing their daughter's wedding day? Did they have some kind of family emergency that prevents them from traveling?" The hope in her question reflected her inability to comprehend that parents might voluntarily choose absence over presence at such a significant milestone in their child's life. Her family experience had been shaped by adults who viewed important celebrations as sacred obligations that took precedence over personal preferences or minor disagreements. The Chen family had consistently demonstrated that love expressed itself through showing up, especially during moments that mattered most to the people they cared about. I handed her my phone with the text message still displayed on the screen, watching her expression shift from confusion to horror as she read through my father's carefully constructed explanation for their coordinated abandonment. The clinical tone of his communication seemed even more heartless when filtered through the perspective of someone who had never experienced conditional family love or strategic emotional manipulation. "This is unconscionable," Jennifer said after reading the message twice to ensure she had not misunderstood its content or implications. "They are punishing you for building a life with someone who makes you happy because his family has resources and demonstrates affection differently than they do. This is not about family values or respect. This is about pride and control." Her analysis cut directly to the motivations that I had been reluctant to acknowledge even within my own internal processing. The months of increasing criticism and demands had not been about legitimate concerns regarding wedding planning or relationship choices. They had been about my family's inability to accept that I had found happiness and support within a different family structure that highlighted the limitations and dysfunctions of their own approach to relationships. The phone buzzed with another text message, this time from my cousin Maria, who had apparently been designated as the family spokesperson for additional communication. Her message read, "Elena, your parents asked me to let you know that they are praying you will reconsider the choices that have led to this painful situation. They love you and want what is best for your future, but they cannot participate in a ceremony that celebrates decisions they believe will ultimately cause you harm. They hope that after you have had time to reflect on their concerns, you will understand that their absence comes from a place of love, rather than rejection." The passive-aggressive tone of Maria's message revealed the extent to which my extended family had been recruited to support my parents' position and apply additional pressure during this vulnerable moment. The suggestion that their abandonment represented love rather than punishment demonstrated the sophisticated emotional manipulation that had characterized my family relationships throughout my adult life. They had transformed their selfishness into martyrdom, their control into concern, and their rejection into a twisted form of care. Jennifer read the additional message with increasing indignation. "Elena, this is emotional blackmail disguised as spiritual guidance. They are attempting to convince you that their inability to celebrate your happiness somehow represents superior moral judgment. This behavior is neither loving nor supportive. It is designed to make you question your own choices and feel guilty for finding joy with people who treat you well." Her validation of my perceptions provided relief from the self-doubt that had begun creeping into my thoughts during the morning's emotional processing. The gaslighting techniques that had been refined through decades of family interactions had created automatic responses that made me question my own judgment whenever conflict arose with my parents or extended relatives. Jennifer's outsider perspective confirmed that their behavior was objectively unreasonable rather than evidence of legitimate concerns that I had failed to address adequately. The morning sunlight streaming through the bridal suite windows illuminated the wedding dress hanging on its custom padded hanger, a reminder that this day was supposed to celebrate the beginning of my marriage to Marcus rather than serve as a battlefield for competing family loyalties. The elaborate beadwork and delicate lace had been selected during shopping trips that included both mothers, creating memories that now felt tainted by the knowledge that my own mother would not witness me wearing the dress we had chosen together. I keep thinking that maybe I should have tried harder to accommodate their concerns, I admitted to Jennifer while staring at the dress that represented hopes and dreams that suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. Perhaps if I had made different choices about the venue or the guest list or the ceremony format, they would have felt more valued and included in the celebration. The self-blame that emerged from my family's rejection reflected patterns that had been established during childhood, when their approval became contingent on my ability to anticipate and satisfy their emotional needs, rather than express my own authentic preferences. The wedding planning process had triggered these familiar dynamics, creating a situation where I automatically assumed responsibility for their dissatisfaction, rather than recognizing that their expectations had been designed to be impossible to fulfill. Jennifer moved to stand beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder, while we both looked at the reflection of two women preparing for what should have been a purely joyful occasion. Elena, you have spent months trying to honor both families' preferences while staying true to your own vision for this celebration. You adjusted timelines, modified menus, and included traditions that had meaning for everyone involved. Their decision to withdraw their support was not about insufficient accommodation. It was about their refusal to share importance with people they perceive as threats to their control over your life. Her perspective helped clarify the fundamental difference between reasonable requests for inclusion and unrealistic demands for dominance that had characterized my family's approach to wedding planning. Every accommodation had been met with additional requirements. Every gesture of respect had prompted new tests of loyalty, and every attempt to balance competing interests had been interpreted as evidence of insufficient prioritization of their preferences over all others. The realization that no amount of compromise would have satisfied their underlying need to maintain control over my choices was both liberating and devastating. Liberation came from understanding that their rejection was not about my failure to love them adequately, but about their inability to love me unconditionally. Devastation emerged from accepting that the family relationships I had hoped to preserve were built on foundations that could not support genuine mutual respect and healthy boundaries. I do not want to call Marcus and ruin his morning with this crisis, I said to Jennifer while attempting to formulate a plan for managing the emotional and logistical challenges created by my family's absence. He should be able to enjoy these final hours of preparation without having to worry about my family drama, or figure out how to provide comfort for something that cannot be fixed. The protective instinct that motivated my desire to shield Marcus from this morning's devastation reflected the healthy partnership dynamics we had established during our relationship. Unlike my family's approach to problems, which involved recruiting others to take sides and validate positions, Marcus and I had learned to handle difficulties as a team while maintaining individual emotional boundaries that prevented one person's crises from completely derailing the other's well-being. Jennifer nodded in understanding while simultaneously recognizing the isolation that my decision would create during the final hours before the ceremony. I respect your desire to protect Marcus's experience this morning, but Elena, you should not have to process this alone. Let me call my mother and ask her to come to the bridal suite early. She has been looking forward to spending time with you before the ceremony, and her presence might provide some of the maternal support that your own mother has chosen not to offer. The suggestion that Helen Chen might be able to provide comfort during this crisis felt both appealing and guilt-inducing. Appealing because her consistent warmth and genuine care had already filled many of the emotional gaps left by my own mother's conditional support. Guilt-inducing because accepting maternal comfort from my future mother-in-law felt like a betrayal of the loyalty that my biological family demanded, even as they demonstrated their own willingness to abandon that loyalty when it conflicted with their pride and control needs. The internal conflict between seeking the support I needed and maintaining allegiance to family members who had proven their conditional commitment created the kind of psychological paralysis that had characterized many of my most important life decisions. The fear of making choices that might be perceived as disloyal had often prevented me from pursuing opportunities or relationships that could have enhanced my happiness and personal growth. I am not sure I can handle Helen's kindness right now without completely falling apart, I confessed to Jennifer while recognizing that emotional breakdown might actually represent healthy processing rather than weakness to be avoided. If she comes here and provides the maternal support that my own mother has withheld, I might not be able to maintain the composure needed to get through the ceremony without dissolving into tears. The assumption that displaying vulnerability would somehow diminish my ability to participate fully in my own wedding reflected the emotional suppression techniques that had been necessary survival skills within my biological family's dysfunction. Authentic expression of pain or disappointment had always been met with criticism about being too sensitive or making situations about myself when others were also struggling with difficult circumstances. Jennifer's response challenged this internalized expectation that strength required emotional suppression. Elena, crying about your parents' abandonment would be a completely normal and healthy response to devastating news. You do not need to perform composure for anyone's comfort, especially not during your own wedding preparation. The people who love you want to support you through difficult emotions, not judge you for experiencing them. Her permission to feel the full weight of my family's betrayal without shame or apology created space for processing that I had been unconsciously resisting since reading my father's text message. The relief of being encouraged to experience authentic emotions rather than manage appearances felt foreign but profoundly healing, representing a fundamental difference between the Chen family's approach to relationships and the performance-based love that had shaped my understanding of acceptable behavior. The decision to allow Helen Chen to provide maternal support during this crisis would represent a clear choice between the family that demanded loyalty without offering genuine care and the family that offered care without demanding performance in return. The symbolism of accepting comfort from my future mother-in-law while my biological mother had chosen absence would mark a turning point in my understanding of where true family support could be found. As I reached for my phone to text Jennifer's suggestion to Helen, I realized that my family's abandonment had inadvertently created an opportunity to experience the kind of unconditional maternal love that I had always hoped to receive but had never found within my biological family relationships. Their absence would allow space for the presence of someone who had consistently demonstrated that love should support growth rather than control outcomes. The morning that had begun with devastating rejection was transforming into a choice between competing definitions of family loyalty and authentic love. Helen Chen arrived at the bridal suite 45 minutes after Jennifer's phone call, carrying a thermos of jasmine tea and an expression that balanced maternal concern with determined resolve. She had changed from her earlier casual morning attire into an elegant navy dress that complemented the wedding's color palette, but her demeanor suggested that fashion considerations had been secondary to the urgency of providing emotional support during a crisis that threatened to overshadow her future daughter-in-law's most important day. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Helen possessed the rare ability to bring calm into chaotic situations without minimizing the legitimate complexity of the emotions involved. Her presence filled the space with warmth that felt both nurturing and strengthening, creating an environment where vulnerability could be expressed without shame, while solutions could be explored without pressure to reach premature conclusions. "Jennifer explained that your family has chosen not to attend the wedding," Helen said while settling into the upholstered chair beside my makeup station. Her voice carried acknowledgement of the situation's gravity, without the dramatic emotional escalation that often accompanied family crises. "I cannot imagine the pain that their decision has caused you, Elena, but I want you to know that you are surrounded by people who consider it an honor to witness your marriage to Marcus." The directness of her approach provided immediate relief from the diplomatic dancing that had characterized most conversations about my family's increasing hostility during recent weeks. Helen's willingness to name the situation clearly and acknowledge its impact demonstrated respect for my intelligence and emotional capacity, contrasting sharply with the condescending explanations and justifications that my biological family had used to frame their conditional support. I handed Helen my phone with the text messages displayed, watching her face as she absorbed the content and tone of my father's communication. Her expression remained composed throughout her reading, but subtle changes in her posture suggested that she was processing not just the immediate content, but the underlying psychological dynamics that such a message revealed about the sender's character and motivations. "Elena, I have been a mother for 32 years, and I have witnessed many different approaches to parenting and family relationships during that time," Helen said after returning my phone. "What I see in these messages is not love or concern for your well-being. This represents an attempt to control your choices through emotional manipulation and strategic abandonment. Parents who genuinely want their children to flourish do not withdraw support during life's most significant celebrations." Her analysis provided external validation for perceptions that I had been reluctant to trust due to years of conditioning that labeled any criticism of my parents' behavior as ingratitude or disloyalty. Helen's perspective carried the authority of someone who had successfully raised children who maintained healthy, respectful relationships with their parents, while building independent adult lives based on their own values and preferences. The jasmine tea that Helen poured into delicate porcelain cups filled the room with fragrance that immediately transported me to the many comfortable evenings I had spent in her kitchen during the engagement period. Those informal gatherings had provided glimpses into family dynamics that prioritized mutual respect over hierarchical control, where disagreements could be discussed without threats of withdrawal or punishment, and where individual growth was celebrated rather than perceived as betrayal. "Helen, I keep wondering if there was something more I could have done to help them feel included and valued during the wedding planning process," I confessed while accepting the warm cup that seemed to provide physical comfort alongside emotional support. Perhaps if I had made different choices about vendors or traditions or guest list allocations, they would have felt more respected and been willing to participate in the celebration. The persistent self-blame that emerged whenever conflict arose with my family reflected deeply embedded patterns that had been reinforced through decades of interactions where their emotional reactions became my responsibility to manage and resolve. This psychological conditioning had created automatic responses that made me assume fault for relationship difficulties, rather than examine whether the other party's expectations had been reasonable or achievable. Helen set down her own cup and leaned forward slightly, her expression conveying both compassion for my struggle and firm conviction about the reality of the situation. "Elena, I have watched you navigate the wedding planning process with extraordinary grace and consideration for everyone's preferences. You have adjusted timelines, modified arrangements, and incorporated traditions from both families, despite the additional complexity and expense involved. Your parents' decision to withdraw their support was not about insufficient accommodation. It was about their inability to share importance with people they perceive as competition for your loyalty and attention." Her assessment helped clarify the fundamental impossibility of satisfying demands that were designed to be unsatisfiable. The months of increasing criticism and escalating requirements had not represented legitimate concerns that could be addressed through additional effort or compromise. They had constituted a testing system intended to demonstrate whether I would prioritize their comfort over my own authentic desires and Marcus's family's generous inclusion. I have spent considerable time observing how different families approach relationships and conflict resolution. Helen continued while refilling our teacups with practiced efficiency. Some families operate from foundations of genuine love and mutual respect, where disagreements can be discussed openly without threats of abandonment or withdrawal of affection. Other families use emotional manipulation and conditional support to maintain control over adult children, who should be free to make independent choices about their lives and relationships. The distinction she drew between these two approaches to family dynamics provided a framework for understanding not just my current crisis, but patterns that had characterized my family relationships throughout my adult life. Every major decision about education, career, living arrangements, and relationships had been accompanied by similar cycles of criticism, demands for consultation, and threats of disappointment that were designed to influence my choices rather than support my growth. Helen reached into her purse and withdrew a small leather journal that appeared well-worn from frequent use. "Elena, I want to share something with you that I learned during my own wedding planning process 33 years ago. My parents had immigrated to America only 5 years earlier, and they were still adjusting to cultural differences and social expectations that felt foreign and sometimes threatening to their traditional values. The parallel she was drawing to her own experience suggested that family resistance to wedding choices represented universal challenges rather than unique personal failures. Her willingness to share vulnerable details from her own past demonstrated the mentorship approach that had characterized her relationship with me throughout the engagement period, where wisdom was transmitted through story and example rather than lecture and judgment. David's family had been in America for 2 generations and had achieved considerable financial success through his grandfather's manufacturing business. Helen continued while opening the journal to pages filled with careful handwriting. "My parents were intimidated by the economic disparity and worried that I was being welcomed into David's family only because I represented an exotic novelty rather than a daughter-in-law who would be truly valued and respected over time." The similarities between her historical experience and my current situation were striking, but the crucial difference lay in how her parents had processed their concerns and anxieties. Rather than withdrawing support or creating ultimatums, they had communicated their worries directly and worked collaboratively to address the underlying fears that motivated their initial resistance to the relationship. My mother called me 2 weeks before the wedding to express her concerns about cultural differences and economic disparities that might create future challenges in my marriage, Helen said while turning pages to locate specific entries. Rather than demanding that I choose between their approval and my own happiness, she asked questions designed to help me think through potential difficulties and develop strategies for maintaining my own identity while building a life with someone from a different background. The contrast between her mother's approach to pre-wedding anxiety and my parents' ultimatum-based response highlighted the fundamental difference between concern that sought to strengthen versus control that sought to dominate. Helen's family had used their worries as opportunities to provide guidance and support, while my family had weaponized their concerns to create crisis and demand submission to their preferences. On the morning of my wedding, my parents arrived early at the hotel where I was getting ready, bringing traditional tea ceremony items and family photographs that they wanted to incorporate into our celebration. Helen continued while showing me a faded photograph of herself in a wedding dress, surrounded by both families in obvious harmony. They had decided that their role was to support my happiness rather than protect their own pride, and that decision created the foundation for 33 years of respectful and loving relationships with David's family. The photograph revealed the kind of interfamily harmony that I had hoped to achieve during my own wedding planning, but had been unable to create despite months of careful accommodation and diplomatic compromise. The genuine smiles and relaxed body language captured in that decades-old image demonstrated what became possible when adult family members prioritized celebration over control. Helen closed the journal and looked directly into my eyes with the kind of focused attention that made her guidance feel both personal and profound. "Elena, your parents have chosen to prioritize their own emotional comfort over your happiness on the most important day of your adult life. This decision reveals fundamental information about their capacity for unconditional love and their willingness to support your growth as an independent adult." Her willingness to acknowledge the harsh reality of my family's behavior without attempting to soften or excuse their choices provided the clarity that had been obscured by months of diplomatic explanation and psychological rationalization. The truth was both painful and liberating, creating space for authentic processing rather than continued efforts to minimize the impact of their abandonment. However, Elena, I also want you to understand that their decision has created an opportunity for you to experience your wedding day with complete authenticity and joy, surrounded only by people who genuinely want to celebrate your marriage to Marcus. Helen continued while reaching across to squeeze my hand gently. Sometimes the greatest gifts come through the most painful circumstances, because they force us to recognize which relationships truly serve our highest good. The reframing of my family's absence as potential liberation rather than pure loss provided a perspective that had not occurred to me during the morning's emotional processing. Their withdrawal from the celebration meant that every person present would be there by genuine choice rather than obligation, creating an atmosphere of authentic support that might not have been possible if I had continued attempting to manage competing family loyalties and expectations. "Helen, I am struggling with the logistics of the ceremony itself," I admitted while recognizing that practical concerns needed to be addressed alongside emotional processing. "My father was supposed to walk me down the aisle, and I have no idea how to handle that part of the ceremony without his participation. I cannot ask Marcus's friends or relatives to fill that role, because it would create awkwardness and impose on people who did not sign up for such significant ceremonial responsibilities." The question of who would escort me during the processional represented one of the most visible and symbolic aspects of the traditional wedding ceremony, designed to represent the transition from one family's protection to another's embrace. The absence of my biological father created both logistical complexity and emotional symbolism that needed to be resolved within the next few hours. Helen considered this question thoughtfully while finishing her tea. "Elena, I believe David would consider it an extraordinary honor to walk you down the aisle if you would be comfortable with that arrangement. He has spoken many times about how blessed he feels to welcome you into our family, and I know he would view this role as a privilege rather than an imposition or obligation." The suggestion that my future father-in-law might serve in this capacity felt both appropriate and emotionally overwhelming. David Chen had demonstrated consistent paternal care and support throughout the engagement period, providing guidance without control and resources without conditions. His presence during the processional would represent not just logistical problem-solving, but symbolic recognition of where authentic parental support could be found. "Would that arrangement feel comfortable to you?" Helen asked while recognizing that the decision needed to reflect my own preferences rather than her family's willingness to provide assistance. David would never want to overstep boundaries or create any sense of obligation, but he would be deeply honored to play that role if it would bring you comfort and joy on your wedding day. The choice between walking alone as a symbol of independence or accepting David's escort as a symbol of chosen family represented more than ceremonial logistics. It reflected a fundamental decision about how to define family relationships and where to find the support that had been withheld by people who should have provided it unconditionally. As I considered Helen's offer, I realized that accepting David's participation would represent a clear statement about which relationships had earned the honor of being included in life's most significant moments. The man who had consistently demonstrated paternal care would serve in the role that had been abandoned by the man who had biological responsibility but lacked emotional commitment. The decision to accept David Chen's offer to walk me down the aisle represented more than ceremonial logistics. As I sat in the bridal suite surrounded by Helen's maternal warmth and Jennifer's sisterly support, I recognized that this choice would fundamentally alter my understanding of family loyalty and authentic love. The phone call to David required summoning courage that I had not known I possessed. Courage to accept help from someone who had earned the right to provide it, rather than demanding it through biological connection alone. Helen dialed David's number on speakerphone, while I gathered the emotional strength necessary to make this request. The vulnerability of asking for such significant support from someone who had become family through choice rather than obligation felt both terrifying and liberating. This conversation would represent my first clear statement that actions mattered more than blood relations when determining who deserved inclusion in life's most meaningful moments. David answered on the second ring with the warm professionalism that characterized his approach to all communications, whether business or personal. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to solving complex problems, while maintaining genuine care for the human elements involved in every situation he encountered. "Elena, Helen explained that your family has chosen not to attend the wedding today," David said with characteristic directness that eliminated the need for diplomatic explanations or emotional preparation. "I want you to know that their decision reflects their limitations rather than your worth, and it creates an opportunity for people who genuinely value your happiness to demonstrate their commitment in more meaningful ways." His immediate focus on my emotional well-being rather than the logistics of the situation revealed the paternal instincts that had emerged naturally during our relationship. Unlike my biological father's tendency to analyze situations through the lens of his own pride and social perceptions, David consistently prioritized the human impact of circumstances and decisions on the people he cared about most. "David, I was wondering if you might consider walking me down the aisle today," I said while maintaining eye contact with Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "I understand this is an unusual request, and you may not feel comfortable taking on such a significant role in the ceremony, but it would mean everything to me to have someone who has shown genuine paternal care escort me during this important moment." The silence that followed my request lasted only seconds but felt much longer as I waited for David's response. The possibility that he might decline due to concerns about overstepping boundaries or creating awkwardness created a moment of vulnerability that highlighted how much emotional significance I had attached to this symbolic gesture of acceptance and support. "Elena, I would be deeply honored to walk you down the aisle," David replied with unmistakable emotion in his voice. "You have brought tremendous joy into our family, and Marcus has never been happier than he has been since meeting you. Having the privilege of escorting you during your wedding processional would represent one of the most meaningful experiences of my life." The relief and gratitude that flooded through me at his acceptance revealed how much I had needed this confirmation that chosen family could provide the support that biological family had withheld. David's willingness to step into this role without hesitation or conditions demonstrated the kind of unconditional commitment that I had always hoped to receive from my own father but had never experienced consistently. Helen reached across to squeeze my hand as tears began flowing freely for the first time since receiving my father's devastating text message that morning. The emotional release felt cleansing rather than overwhelming, representing authentic processing of grief alongside recognition of the genuine love that surrounded me despite my family's abandonment. "David, there is something else I need to share with you about today's ceremony," I continued while recognizing that complete honesty about my family's behavior would be necessary for him to understand the full context of his role. "My father's text message this morning was particularly cruel in its timing and tone. He suggested that marrying Marcus represents a betrayal of family values and proper respect for the people who raised me." Quote, I read David the complete text exchange while watching his expression in Helen's reflection in the vanity mirror. His face revealed controlled anger at the deliberate cruelty of abandoning a daughter on her wedding day, followed by the kind of protective determination that had characterized his approach to business challenges throughout his successful career. "Elena, your father's message reveals someone who has confused control with love and pride with principle," David said after processing the full scope of my family's behavior. Parents who genuinely want their children to flourish celebrate relationships that bring happiness and stability, rather than punishing choices that challenge their own preferences or highlight their limitations. His analysis provided external validation for perceptions that I had struggled to trust, due to years of conditioning that made me question my own judgment whenever conflict arose with my parents. David's perspective carried additional weight because his success in business and personal relationships had been built on accurate assessment of character and motivation, rather than wishful thinking or diplomatic avoidance of uncomfortable truths. The honor of walking you down the aisle takes on even greater significance knowing that I am stepping into a role that has been abandoned by someone who should have cherished the opportunity. David continued with the kind of conviction that had made him successful in competitive business environments. This ceremony will demonstrate that families can be built through choice and mutual respect rather than obligation and conditional support. The conversation concluded with practical arrangements about timing and positioning during the processional, but the emotional impact extended far beyond logistical coordination. David's immediate and wholehearted acceptance of this role had transformed my wedding morning from a crisis management situation into a celebration of the relationships that had proven their worth through consistent actions rather than biological connections. After ending the call, I sat quietly with Helen and Jennifer while processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The man who would walk me down the aisle in 2 hours had demonstrated more paternal care during our 18-month relationship than my biological father had shown during recent years of increasing criticism and conditional support. Elena, this decision represents a significant turning point in your understanding of family relationships, Helen observed while beginning the process of helping me into my wedding dress. You have chosen to honor the person who has earned the right to provide support rather than the person who demands recognition based on biological connection alone. The symbolism of accepting David's escort would extend beyond the wedding ceremony itself to represent a fundamental shift in how I defined family loyalty and authentic love. The choice demonstrated that respect must be earned through actions rather than assumed through genetics, and that the people who show up consistently during important moments deserve recognition over those who withdraw support when their conditions are not met. As Helen and Jennifer helped secure the intricate beading and delicate lace of my wedding gown, I felt the physical transformation accompanying the emotional evolution that had been developing throughout the morning. The dress that had been selected during shopping trips with both mothers would now be worn in a ceremony where only one mother would be present to witness the culmination of months of careful planning and preparation. The absence of my biological family created space for deeper appreciation of the relationships that had proven their commitment through consistent support rather than conditional approval. Every person who would witness the ceremony had chosen to be present because they genuinely wanted to celebrate Marcus's and my commitment to building a life together based on mutual respect and authentic affection. Jennifer worked with practiced precision to arrange the cathedral-length veil that would complete the bridal ensemble, her movements reflecting the excitement that had characterized her approach to wedding preparations throughout the engagement period. Her enthusiasm about gaining a sister through marriage had never wavered, despite my family's increasing hostility, demonstrating the kind of unconditional acceptance that had attracted me to the Chen family dynamics from our first meeting. "Elena, you look absolutely radiant," Jennifer said while making final adjustments to ensure that every detail met the standards of perfection that such an important occasion deserved. "Marcus is going to be speechless when he sees you walking down that aisle. Especially knowing that my father will be escorting you during this moment." The professional photographer arrived at the bridal suite precisely on schedule, ready to capture the final preparation moments that would become treasured memories of this transformative day. Her approach balanced artistic vision with respectful sensitivity to the emotional complexity that surrounded the morning's events, creating an atmosphere that felt celebratory rather than performative. The photographs of Helen helping with last-minute veil adjustments would document the maternal support that had filled the void created by my own mother's absence. The images of Jennifer providing sisterly encouragement would capture the authentic friendship that had developed naturally, rather than being forced through family obligations. These visual records would serve as permanent reminders of the people who had chosen to provide love and support when it mattered most. As the final preparation moments approached, I realized that my family's abandonment had inadvertently created the most authentic wedding experience possible. Every person present would be there by genuine choice rather than social obligation, creating an atmosphere of celebration that could not have been achieved if I had continued attempting to manage competing family loyalties and conditional support systems. The text message that had shattered my morning expectations had ultimately provided the clarity necessary to recognize which relationships truly served my highest good. The people who had withdrawn their support when their conditions were not met had revealed the limitations of their love, while those who had stepped forward to provide assistance had demonstrated the depth of their commitment to my happiness and well-being. Helen presented me with a small wrapped gift as we prepared to leave the bridal suite for the final journey to the ceremony location. The package contained a delicate pearl bracelet that had belonged to David's grandmother, a family heirloom that represented inclusion in generational traditions that spanned continents and cultures. "Elena, this bracelet has been worn by every Chen family bride for 4 generations, Helen explained while fastening the clasp around my wrist. David's grandmother brought it from Taiwan when they immigrated to America, believing that it would bring good fortune and lasting happiness to the marriages it blessed. Today you become part of that legacy." The weight of the pearls against my skin felt both delicate and substantial, representing the kind of meaningful tradition that my own family had never established or maintained. The Chen family's ability to honor their heritage while embracing new members demonstrated the healthy balance between respecting the past and building the future that had been missing from my biological family's approach to relationships. As we prepared to leave the bridal suite, my phone buzzed with one final text message from my cousin Maria, apparently making a last-minute attempt to convince me to postpone the ceremony until my family could be persuaded to attend. The message read, "Elena, your parents are heartbroken about this situation and are praying that you will reconsider the choices that have created such painful division within our family. They love you deeply and believe that with more time and communication, these differences can be resolved in ways that honor everyone's concerns and values." The timing of this final manipulation attempt, arriving moments before I was scheduled to walk down the aisle, revealed the calculated nature of my family's emotional warfare. Their strategy involved maintaining pressure until the last possible moment, hoping to create sufficient doubt and guilt to influence my decisions even as I was beginning the ceremony itself. Jennifer read the message over my shoulder and shook her head with undisguised disgust. "Elena, this is psychological manipulation disguised as concern for family harmony. They are attempting to make you question your choices and feel responsible for their emotional reactions, even as you are walking toward your future happiness." Helen's response was more measured but equally clear in its assessment of the situation. "Elena, people who genuinely love you want you to experience joy during your wedding ceremony, not guilt and confusion about family relationships that they have chosen to complicate through their own behavioral choices." I deleted the message without responding and turned off my phone completely, recognizing that this moment required complete focus on the celebration ahead rather than continued engagement with people who had proven their unwillingness to provide unconditional support during life's most significant milestones. The walk from the bridal suite to the ceremony location would represent the final physical journey from my old understanding of family relationships to a new definition based on choice, commitment, and authentic love, rather than obligation, genetics, and conditional approval. David Chen would be waiting at the beginning of the rose-petal-lined aisle, ready to provide the paternal support that had been earned through consistent actions rather than demanded through biological connection. As we approached the doors that would open onto the garden ceremony space, I felt the transformation that had been building throughout the morning reach its completion. The woman who walked through those doors would be different from the person who had awakened that morning expecting to manage competing family loyalties and conditional support systems. The threshold ahead represented more than the entrance to a wedding ceremony. It marked the beginning of a life built on relationships that had proven their worth through actions rather than words, commitment rather than conditions, and authentic love rather than strategic manipulation, designed to maintain control over independent adult choices. The garden ceremony space at the Willows estate had been transformed into an intimate sanctuary that reflected both the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest landscape and the careful attention to detail that had characterized the months of wedding planning. White rose petals created a pathway through carefully manicured lawns, while seasonal flowers in soft pastels provided elegant accents that complemented rather than competed with the surrounding natural environment. David Chen stood at the entrance to the ceremony space, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that reflected both his business success and his respect for the significance of the occasion. His presence radiated the calm confidence that had made him successful in complex negotiations and challenging business environments. But today that strength was channeled entirely toward providing the paternal support that would guide me through one of the most meaningful moments of my adult life. The transformation in my emotional state upon seeing David waiting to escort me was immediate and profound. The anxiety that had dominated my morning since receiving my father's cruel text message began dissolving into anticipation and gratitude. This man had chosen to step into a role that required no obligation from him, motivated entirely by genuine care for my happiness and his son's well-being. "Elena, you look absolutely beautiful," David said while offering his arm with the kind of gentle formality that acknowledged both the ceremony's significance and my emotional vulnerability. "I want you to know that walking you down this aisle represents one of the greatest honors of my life. You have brought such joy to our family, and Marcus has never been happier than he has been since meeting you." His words provided the final emotional foundation necessary to proceed with confidence and grace, rather than uncertainty and loss. The man who had earned the right to provide paternal support through consistent actions would now publicly demonstrate that families could be built through choice and mutual respect, rather than genetics and conditional approval. The string quartet positioned near the altar began playing the processional music that Helen and I had selected during one of our collaborative planning sessions. The melody carried both elegance and emotional depth, creating an atmosphere that felt sacred rather than merely ceremonial. The sound filled the garden space and seemed to acknowledge that this celebration represented more than the joining of two individuals, but the creation of new family structures based on authentic relationships. As David and I began walking down the rose-petal pathway, I became aware of the guests who had chosen to witness this moment. Each person present represented a relationship that had demonstrated genuine support for Marcus's and my happiness, rather than conditional approval based on their own preferences or social expectations. The Chen family occupied the front rows, with expressions of joy and celebration that reflected their authentic enthusiasm about welcoming me into their family structure. Marcus's college friends and professional colleagues filled several rows, representing relationships that had developed through shared experiences and mutual respect, rather than family obligations. Their presence demonstrated that chosen communities could provide support systems that rivaled or exceeded the reliability of biological connections. Many had traveled significant distances to attend the ceremony, indicating their investment in witnessing this important milestone rather than merely fulfilling social obligations. My own friends from work and college were scattered throughout the seating area, providing the continuity between my past experiences and future commitments that would help bridge the transition from single to married life. Their enthusiastic expressions and supportive gestures created visual confirmation that this celebration was surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to witness my happiness, rather than judge my choices or analyze my decisions for their own purposes. The conspicuous absence of my biological family created empty spaces in the seating arrangement that initially felt like visible reminders of rejection and abandonment. However, as David and I continued our measured walk toward the altar, I began recognizing that these vacant seats represented liberation rather than loss. The people who had chosen not to attend could not diminish the joy of those who had made the effort to be present during this significant moment. Marcus waited at the altar with an expression that combined excitement, love, and visible emotion, as he watched his father escort me toward our commitment ceremony. His face revealed genuine appreciation for David's willingness to step into this meaningful role, understanding that this gesture represented more than ceremonial logistics, but a demonstration of the family values that had shaped his own character and approach to relationships. The officiant, Reverend Patricia Martinez, had been selected for her ability to create ceremony experiences that honored both spiritual significance and personal authenticity. During our pre-wedding consultations, she had demonstrated understanding of the complex family dynamics that surrounded our celebration. While maintaining focus on the commitment that Marcus and I were making to each other, rather than the external circumstances that had created challenges during the planning process. As we approached the altar, David paused to acknowledge the symbolic importance of this transition moment. "Elena, it has been my privilege to walk beside you during this important journey," he said while gently placing my hand in Marcus's extended palm. "I entrust you to my son's care, knowing that he will cherish and support you as you deserve to be loved." The traditional phrase, "Who gives this woman to be married?" was modified to reflect the reality that I was choosing my own path rather than being transferred between male authorities. Reverend Martinez asked, "Who stands with Elena as she makes this commitment to Marcus?" David's response acknowledged both his honor in serving this role and my agency in making independent choices about my life and relationships. "I do, with great joy and blessing," David replied while stepping back to take his seat beside Helen in the front row. His participation had provided exactly the paternal support that the moment required, without overstepping boundaries or creating obligations that might complicate future family relationships. The ceremony itself proceeded according to the timeline and format that Marcus and I had developed during months of careful planning and preparation. Our vows reflected the genuine partnership that had developed during our relationship, acknowledging both individual strengths and shared commitments that would provide the foundation for building a life together based on mutual respect and authentic affection. Marcus's vows included acknowledgement of the challenges we had navigated during the engagement period, expressing gratitude for my strength and resilience in handling family pressures, while maintaining focus on our relationship priorities. His words demonstrated understanding of the courage required to choose authentic happiness over conditional approval, and his commitment to supporting my growth and independence throughout our married life. My own vows addressed the transformative impact of finding a partner whose love did not require performance or conformity to external expectations. I spoke about learning to recognize the difference between relationships that supported growth and those that demanded submission, and my appreciation for Marcus's consistent demonstration that love should enhance rather than constrain individual authenticity and personal development. The exchange of rings provided tangible symbols of the commitments being made publicly before witnesses who had chosen to attend because they genuinely supported our partnership, rather than fulfilling social obligations. The simple platinum bands represented the kind of enduring elegance that would age gracefully, rather than following trends that might become dated or inappropriate over time. Reverend Martinez's pronouncement of our marriage status marked the official completion of the legal and spiritual processes that transformed our relationship from engagement to lifelong partnership. The applause and celebration that followed reflected authentic joy from people who had invested emotionally in our success, rather than merely observing ceremonial requirements. The recessional music began as Marcus and I walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, surrounded by the congratulations and well wishes of guests who had witnessed our commitment ceremony. The absence of my biological family no longer felt like a void that diminished the celebration, but rather as confirmation that we were beginning married life surrounded only by relationships that had proven their genuine support through consistent actions. David and Helen Chen walked immediately behind us during the recessional, their positioning reflecting their role as the primary family support system that had made this celebration possible, through their generosity, encouragement, and unconditional acceptance. Their presence provided continuity between the ceremony and the reception activities that would extend the celebration throughout the afternoon and evening. The receiving line that formed immediately after the ceremony provided opportunities for individual guests to express their personal congratulations and share specific thoughts about the ceremony experience. Many commented on the beauty and emotional impact of David's role in escorting me down the aisle, recognizing that his participation had created a moment that transcended typical wedding formalities to represent genuine family love and support. Jennifer Chen approached during the receiving line with tears of joy and excitement about officially becoming my sister through marriage rather than simply friendship. Her enthusiasm had never wavered throughout the challenging months of wedding planning, demonstrating the kind of unconditional sibling support that had been missing from my relationship with my biological brother. "Elena, that ceremony was absolutely perfect," Jennifer said, while embracing me with genuine warmth and celebration. "Watching Dad walk you down the aisle was one of the most beautiful moments I have ever witnessed. You could see the love and pride in his face, and the way Marcus's expression lit up when he saw you approaching was absolutely magical." The reception cocktail hour began immediately following the ceremony, providing opportunities for informal conversation and celebration in the garden setting that had been decorated with the same attention to detail that characterized the ceremony space. The late afternoon sunlight created perfect conditions for photography, while guests enjoyed signature cocktails and appetizers that reflected both our cultural backgrounds and personal preferences. David approached Marcus and me during the cocktail hour to share his personal reflections on the ceremony experience and his gratitude for being included in such a meaningful role. His comments revealed both his understanding of the significance of his participation and his commitment to continuing the paternal relationship that had developed naturally during our engagement period. Elena, having the privilege of walking you down the aisle today has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, David said while raising his champagne glass in a private toast before the larger reception celebrations began. You have become the daughter that Helen and I never had, and we consider ourselves blessed to have you as part of our family through your love for Marcus and his love for you. His acknowledgement of my status as a daughter, rather than merely a daughter-in-law, reflected the authentic family relationship that had developed based on genuine affection and mutual respect rather than obligation or social expectation. The Chen family's ability to create inclusive relationships that honored both biological connections and chosen bonds demonstrated the healthy family dynamics that had attracted me to their approach to relationships from our first meeting. Helen joined our conversation with her own expressions of joy and satisfaction about the ceremony's success and the family celebration that was continuing to unfold throughout the reception activities. Her role as mother figure had been crucial during the mourning crisis when my own mother's absence created emotional void that could have undermined my ability to experience pure joy during the wedding preparation and ceremony itself. Elena, you were absolutely radiant walking down that aisle, Helen said while adjusting a small detail of my veil that had shifted during the receiving line activities. The love and happiness on your face were unmistakable, and I believe everyone present could see that this ceremony represented exactly the kind of authentic celebration that weddings should be, when they honor genuine love rather than social expectations. Quote, the conversations during cocktail hour revealed that many guests had been aware of the family tensions that had surrounded the wedding planning process, but their focus remained consistently supportive of Marcus's and my happiness, rather than judgmental about the conflicts that had created challenges during recent months. Their mature approach to complex family dynamics demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence and relationship skills that characterized the community we had built around our partnership. As the reception dinner service began, the absence of my biological family became less noticeable, because the celebration was filled with people who had chosen to be present and participate actively in the joy of the occasion. The speeches and toasts that followed dinner focused on genuine appreciation for our relationship and authentic wishes for our future happiness, rather than obligatory comments that fulfilled social requirements without reflecting personal investment in our success. David's father of the bride toast acknowledged both his honor in serving the traditional paternal role and his genuine excitement about the family expansion that Marcus's marriage represented. His comments balanced humor with heartfelt emotion while avoiding any reference to the circumstances that had created his opportunity to participate in this meaningful capacity. The evening concluded with dancing and celebration that extended well past the originally planned timeline, as guests seemed reluctant to end the festivities that had created such positive energy and authentic joy. The success of the entire event demonstrated that weddings could achieve their intended purpose of celebrating love and commitment when surrounded by people who genuinely supported the couple's happiness rather than pursuing their own agendas or satisfying conditional approval requirements. As Marcus and I prepared to leave the reception venue, I realized that my family's abandonment had inadvertently created the most authentic and meaningful wedding experience possible. Every moment had been genuine rather than performative. Every guest had participated by choice rather than obligation, and every element of the celebration had reflected our actual values rather than compromises designed to satisfy competing demands from people whose support came with conditions that undermined rather than enhanced our joy. The honeymoon period following our wedding ceremony lasted exactly 11 days. Marcus and I had returned from our week-long retreat in the San Juan Islands, where we had deliberately avoided social media and limited phone contact to preserve the sacred space of early married life. The isolation had provided essential time to process the emotional transformation that had occurred during our wedding day, while beginning to establish the rhythms and traditions that would define our partnership moving forward. The first indication that our family situation would continue generating complications arrived through my work email account on a Tuesday morning in late September. The message came from Dr. Patricia Gomez, the family therapist whom my parents had apparently consulted following their decision to boycott the wedding ceremony. Her professional letterhead suggested legitimacy, but the content revealed that she had been engaged to validate their position rather than provide objective guidance about repairing damaged relationships. The email requested my participation in family therapy sessions designed to address what Dr. Gomez characterized as communication breakdowns and misunderstandings that had led to painful separation between family members who clearly loved each other despite recent conflicts. Her language carefully avoided acknowledging that my parents had made deliberate choices to abandon their daughter during one of life's most significant celebrations, instead framing their absence as the unfortunate result of complicated emotions and insufficient dialogue. The therapeutic intervention represented a sophisticated escalation in my family's campaign to regain control over my choices and relationships, without accepting responsibility for their own behaviors, or acknowledging the validity of my emotional responses to their conditional support systems. Dr. Gomez's involvement provided professional credibility for their narrative that positioned me as an ungrateful daughter who had damaged family relationships through selfishness and poor judgment. Marcus discovered me reading this email at the kitchen table of our new apartment, surrounded by unpacked wedding gifts and the comfortable chaos of two lives being merged into shared domestic space. His expression immediately shifted from mourning contentment to protective concern as he recognized the distress that must have been visible on my face, despite my attempts to maintain composed processing of this latest family manipulation. "Elena, what has happened?" Marcus asked while settling into the chair beside me with the kind of focused attention that characterized his approach to problems requiring collaborative resolution. His business experience had taught him to gather complete information before developing response strategies, but his personal investment in my well-being made him ready to provide whatever support the situation demanded. I handed him my laptop with the email displayed, watching his expression evolve from confusion to anger, as he absorbed both the content and the implications of this professional intervention, designed to pressure me into accepting blame for my family's choices. His understanding of healthy relationship dynamics made him immediately recognize the manipulation tactics disguised as therapeutic concern for family harmony. "Elena, this represents psychological manipulation at a very sophisticated level," Marcus said after reading through Dr. Gomez's message twice to ensure accurate understanding of its purpose and tone. "Your parents have engaged a professional to provide credibility for their narrative that you are responsible for family conflicts that they created through their own conditional support and strategic abandonment during your wedding." His analysis confirmed perceptions that I had been reluctant to trust completely due to ingrained patterns of self-doubt that emerged whenever my family applied pressure through authority figures or professional validation of their positions. Marcus's outsider perspective provided clarity about dynamics that had been obscured through years of conditioning that made me question my own emotional responses to unreasonable treatment. The therapeutic intervention created immediate practical pressures that required response within the professional timeline that Dr. Gomez had established for scheduling initial family sessions. Her message indicated that my parents had already committed to weekly appointments and were prepared to invest significant time and financial resources in this process, suggesting their determination to pursue this avenue until achieving their desired outcomes. My first instinct involved immediate rejection of participation in therapy sessions that had been designed to validate my family's position, rather than explore healthy relationship dynamics, or acknowledge the legitimate impact of their choices on my emotional well-being. However, Marcus suggested that we consider whether strategic engagement might provide opportunities to establish clear boundaries, while demonstrating good faith efforts to address family concerns through appropriate channels. "Elena, refusing to participate could be characterized as unwillingness to work on family relationships, which might validate their narrative that you have become unreasonable or prideful," Marcus observed while helping me analyze the potential consequences of various response options. However, agreeing to participate without clear conditions might expose you to additional manipulation disguised as therapeutic intervention. The strategic complexity of this situation required careful consideration of both short-term tactics and long-term relationship goals. My parents had demonstrated willingness to invest considerable resources in maintaining control over my choices, suggesting that simple avoidance would likely result in escalation rather than resolution of the underlying conflicts that had been exposed during wedding planning. After extensive discussion with Marcus and consultation with my own individual therapist, I decided to propose modified participation that included specific conditions designed to ensure productive rather than manipulative therapeutic engagement. My response to Dr. Gomez outlined requirements that would need to be met before I would consider attending family sessions with people who had proven their willingness to use professional settings for continued attempts to control my choices. The conditions included individual preliminary sessions where I could share my perspective on family dynamics without interruption or immediate contradiction from my parents, written agreements about therapeutic goals that focused on healthy boundary establishment rather than reunion at any cost, and explicit acknowledgement that adults have the right to make independent choices about relationships and life partners without family approval being required for those choices to be considered valid or appropriate. Dr. Gomez's response revealed the limitations of her objectivity and the extent to which she had been influenced by my parents' narrative about family conflicts and relationship priorities. Her reply dismissed most of my conditions as defensive mechanisms that prevented authentic engagement with family healing processes, while characterizing my requirements for individual sessions as evidence of unwillingness to participate in good faith collaborative resolution of conflicts. The therapeutic intervention had been designed to create situations where my parents could present their concerns and criticisms within professional settings that lent credibility to their positions, while limiting my ability to respond effectively or establish boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. Dr. Gomez's approach reflected family therapy models that prioritized reunion over individual autonomy, assuming that family relationships should be preserved regardless of the behaviors or choices that had created separation. Marcus's response to this development revealed protective instincts that balanced respect for my autonomy with willingness to provide active support when facing organized opposition from people determined to undermine our marriage. His business experience included negotiations with parties who used professional intermediaries to advance agendas that served their interests rather than mutual benefit, providing relevant expertise for managing this family situation. Elena, your parents have essentially hired a professional advocate to pressure you into accepting their narrative about family relationships, while providing legitimacy for their refusal to acknowledge responsibility for their own choices, Marcus said, while reviewing Dr. Gomez's dismissive response to my participation conditions. This therapeutic intervention represents escalation rather than genuine attempts to repair relationships through healthy communication and mutual respect. The realization that my family had weaponized professional therapy to continue their campaign for control created additional layers of betrayal beyond their wedding day abandonment. The people who should have prioritized my emotional well-being were instead investing resources in sophisticated manipulation designed to force compliance with their preferences, rather than accepting my right to make independent choices about my life and relationships. The situation escalated further when Dr. Gomez contacted Marcus directly through his business office, requesting his participation in couple sessions designed to address what she characterized as his influence on my family relationships and willingness to support decisions that had caused pain for people who loved me. Her approach suggested that my marriage represented the primary obstacle to family reconciliation rather than my parents, conditional support and abandonment being the actual source of relationship damage. Marcus's professional assistant forwarded Dr. Gomez's communication with a note expressing confusion about why a family therapist would be contacting him about personal matters through business channels. The boundary violation inherent in this approach revealed Dr. Gomez's willingness to exceed appropriate professional limits in service of my parents' agenda, confirming that this therapeutic intervention lacked the objectivity and ethical standards that should characterize legitimate family counseling. Elena, this therapist has crossed significant professional boundaries by contacting me through business channels and characterizing our marriage as problematic for your family relationships, Marcus said while drafting a formal response that established clear limits on Dr. Gomez's ability to involve him in processes that had been designed without his input or consent. Her approach reveals partisan advocacy rather than objective therapeutic intervention, The professional boundary violations provided grounds for filing complaints with relevant licensing boards and professional organizations that regulated family therapy practice and ethical standards. However, pursuing formal complaints would require time and energy that could be better invested in building our marriage and focusing on relationships that supported our happiness, rather than demanded submission to external control systems. Marcus suggested an alternative approach that involved documenting all communications while establishing clear boundaries about acceptable forms of contact and interaction regarding our family relationships. His strategy focused on protecting our autonomy while avoiding escalation that might provide additional ammunition for my parents' narrative about our unwillingness to work on family relationships through appropriate channels. The coordinated nature of this therapeutic intervention suggested that my parents had spent considerable time and resources developing strategies for regaining control over my choices without accepting responsibility for their own behaviors, or acknowledging the legitimacy of my emotional responses to their conditional support systems. Their investment in professional validation revealed determination that extended far beyond the wedding conflicts to encompass fundamental disagreements about adult independence and family hierarchy. Dr. Gomez's final communication included implicit threats about the consequences of refusing therapeutic intervention for family relationships, that she characterized as repairable, through appropriate professional guidance and mutual willingness to prioritize reconciliation over individual preferences. Her language suggested that my continued resistance to family therapy would be interpreted as evidence of Marcus's negative influence and my own selfishness in prioritizing marriage over family obligations. The ultimatum embedded in this therapeutic approach created familiar dynamics, where my family's approval became conditional on my willingness to accept blame for conflicts they had created, while submitting to processes designed to validate their positions rather than explore healthy relationship alternatives. The professional setting provided legitimacy for manipulation tactics that would have been more easily recognized if deployed through direct family communication. Marcus's analysis of this situation drew parallels to business negotiations, where one party hired consultants or advisors to provide credibility for positions that could not be defended through merit alone. His experience with such tactics provided insights into effective response strategies that preserved our interests, while avoiding engagement in processes designed to benefit our opponents rather than achieve fair resolution. Elena, your parents have created a situation where any response you provide will be interpreted through the framework they have established with this therapist, Marcus observed while helping me develop comprehensive communication strategies. The most effective approach involves refusing to participate in their chosen process while offering alternative solutions that respect healthy relationship boundaries and individual autonomy. The decision to decline participation in Dr. Gomez's therapeutic intervention while offering alternative approaches to family communication represented a strategic choice between engaging with manipulation disguised as professional help and maintaining boundaries that protected our marriage from external interference designed to undermine our partnership through sophisticated psychological pressure. The enemies that emerged following our wedding celebration revealed themselves through professional channels and therapeutic interventions rather than direct confrontation, demonstrating the sophisticated nature of opposition that was willing to invest significant resources in maintaining control over my choices while avoiding responsibility for their own behaviors that had created family separation and conflict. The Christmas season arrived with unprecedented complexity 6 months after our wedding celebration. Marcus and I had established comfortable routines in our shared apartment, while building the foundation of married life through daily decisions about finances, household responsibilities, and future planning. The therapeutic stability we had created together made the approaching holiday obligations feel particularly intrusive, representing the first major test of boundaries we had established following my family's abandonment and subsequent manipulation attempts. The invitation to my parents' annual Christmas Eve gathering arrived through my cousin Maria, who continued serving as the designated family intermediary for communications that my parents were reluctant to initiate directly. The message carried familiar undertones of conditional welcome disguised as olive branch extension, suggesting that my presence would be appreciated if I was prepared to participate in family reconciliation processes that prioritized harmony over accountability. Maria's carefully crafted email explained that my parents had spent considerable time reflecting on recent family conflicts and were ready to move forward with healing processes that would restore relationships to their previous state of mutual respect and affection. The language avoided acknowledgement of specific behaviors or choices that had created separation, instead characterizing the wedding boycott and therapeutic manipulation as unfortunate misunderstandings that could be resolved through renewed commitment to family values and traditions. The invitation included specific conditions for my attendance that revealed the persistent nature of my family's control mechanisms and their unwillingness to accept responsibility for their own choices while demanding submission to their preferred resolution framework. These requirements included arriving without Marcus, participating in group discussions about family communication patterns, and demonstrating renewed commitment to prioritizing biological family relationships over married partnership obligations. Marcus discovered me reviewing this invitation at our kitchen table during breakfast preparation, his expression immediately shifting to protective concern as he recognized the emotional impact that such communications continued generating despite months of boundary establishment and therapeutic processing. His consistent support had provided essential stability during previous family manipulation campaigns, making him naturally alert to signs that additional pressure was being applied through seemingly reasonable requests. Elena, your family appears to be escalating their efforts to separate us while demanding your compliance with their preferred relationship hierarchy, Marcus observed while reading through Maria's invitation and its embedded conditions. The requirement that you attend without me reveals their continued belief that our marriage represents an obstacle to family reconciliation rather than acknowledging their own behaviors as the source of relationship damage. His analysis confirmed perceptions that I had been developing throughout months of processing my family's responses to our wedding celebration and subsequent boundary establishment. The consistency of their approach suggested systematic rather than emotional decision-making, indicating investment in long-term strategies for regaining control over my choices rather than genuine interest in healthy relationship repair. The Christmas invitation represented a significant escalation because holiday gatherings carried cultural and emotional weight that made refusal appear unreasonable to extended family members who had not witnessed the months of manipulation and conditional support that had preceded my parents' wedding boycott. The seasonal timing provided additional leverage through traditions and expectations that characterized absence as selfish prioritization of individual preferences over family obligations. My individual therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, had anticipated this development during our recent sessions focused on preparing for holiday pressures and family reunification attempts that often accompanied seasonal celebrations. Her guidance emphasized the importance of maintaining clarity about personal boundaries while resisting emotional manipulation disguised as holiday spirit and family reconciliation opportunities. Dr. Chen's approach focused on helping me recognize the difference between genuine remorse accompanied by behavioral change and strategic apologies designed to restore previous relationship dynamics without addressing underlying control patterns or conditional support systems. Her framework provided tools for evaluating my family's communications and invitations to determine whether they represented authentic healing opportunities or continued manipulation disguised as seasonal goodwill. During our session immediately following the Christmas invitation, Dr. Chen helped me analyze the specific language and conditions that Maria had included in her communication. The therapeutic examination revealed multiple manipulation tactics embedded within seemingly reasonable requests for family reunion and holiday celebration participation. Elena, your family's invitation includes several requirements that indicate continued investment in control rather than genuine reconciliation, Dr. Chen observed while helping me identify specific problematic elements within Maria's message. The demand that you attend without Marcus suggests they view your marriage as temporary obstacle rather than permanent life choice that deserves respect and accommodation. The therapeutic analysis provided external validation for my instinctive resistance to accepting invitations that came with conditions designed to undermine my marriage, while forcing compliance with family preferences that had not changed despite months of separation and boundary enforcement. Dr. Chen's professional perspective confirmed that healthy family relationships required mutual respect rather than submission to hierarchical control systems. The approach to this inner sanctum of family dynamics required confronting fundamental questions about loyalty, identity, and the definition of authentic love that had been avoided throughout years of accommodation and diplomatic compromise. The Christmas invitation forced acknowledgement that my family's conditional support systems were unlikely to change regardless of my compliance with their requirements or willingness to participate in reunion processes that validated their positions. Marcus suggested that we spend the holiday season creating our own traditions, rather than attempting to navigate family obligations that came with conditions designed to create conflict within our marriage. His proposal involved traveling to visit friends in Seattle, who had invited us to participate in their holiday celebrations, providing alternative community connections that would support our partnership rather than test our commitment to each other. The decision to decline my family's Christmas invitation while accepting alternative social opportunities represented a significant psychological milestone in my development of authentic independence from conditional support systems that had shaped my understanding of family relationships throughout my adult life. This choice would mark the first holiday season where I prioritized my marriage over family expectations that demanded submission to their preferred relationship hierarchy. The response to Maria required careful crafting to communicate my decision while avoiding inflammatory language that could be used to validate my family's narrative about my selfishness or Marcus's negative influence on my character and judgment. The message needed to establish clear boundaries while maintaining dignity and respect for seasonal traditions that held genuine meaning beyond the manipulation tactics that had been layered upon them. After extensive discussion with Marcus and consultation with Dr. Chen, I composed a response that acknowledged the invitation while explaining my inability to participate under the specified conditions. The communication expressed appreciation for their desire to include me in holiday celebrations, while establishing clear expectations about the terms under which I would be willing to participate in future family gatherings. The message explained that my marriage represented a permanent life choice that required respect and accommodation rather than temporary obstacle to be overcome through strategic separation and individual pressure. I clarified that future family participation would require inclusion of my spouse and acknowledgement of our partnership as legitimate relationship that deserved consideration in planning and invitation processes. The response also addressed the therapeutic manipulation that had characterized recent months, expressing my unwillingness to participate in counseling sessions that had been designed to validate their positions, rather than explore healthy relationship alternatives. I offered alternative approaches to family communication that respected individual autonomy, while maintaining opportunities for connection based on mutual respect rather than conditional compliance. Maria's immediate response revealed the extent to which my family had invested emotionally in reunion scenarios that required my submission to their terms, rather than negotiation of mutually acceptable arrangements. Her reply characterized my conditions as evidence of continued selfishness and unwillingness to prioritize family healing over individual preferences that had been influenced by marriage to someone who did not understand our cultural values and relationship traditions. The accusation that Marcus represented negative cultural influence reflected my family's persistent inability to accept that my choices were authentic expressions of my own values rather than manipulation by external parties who sought to control my decisions for their own benefit. This narrative allowed them to avoid acknowledging that my resistance to their demands reflected legitimate concerns about conditional support and emotional manipulation rather than susceptibility to outside influence. The Christmas conflict created additional pressure through extended family members who began contacting me directly to express concern about family division during holiday season, and my apparent unwillingness to participate in reconciliation processes that could restore relationships to their previous harmony. These communications revealed how effectively my parents had managed family narrative to position themselves as victims of my selfishness rather than architects of relationship damage through their own conditional support and strategic abandonment. My Aunt Sophia called personally to share her perspective on family obligations and the importance of forgiveness during seasonal celebrations that should prioritize unity over individual grievances that prevented healing and restoration. Her approach balanced emotional appeal with subtle pressure designed to make my boundary maintenance appear unreasonable to neutral family observers who had not witnessed the months of manipulation and control attempts. Elena, your parents are heartbroken about this separation and have been praying for reconciliation that would allow our family to celebrate Christmas together as we have for so many years, Sophia said during a phone conversation that felt more like intervention than supportive communication. Perhaps you could consider attending the gathering without conditions that make reunion difficult for everyone who loves you and wants to see family relationships restored. The emotional manipulation embedded in Sophia's appeal reflected sophisticated understanding of psychological pressure points that had been developed through years of family dynamics where individual boundaries were discouraged in favor of group harmony that served the preferences of dominant family members. Her approach suggested coordination with my parents rather than independent concern about holiday celebration logistics. Marcus observed these extended family interventions with increasing concern about the systematic nature of pressure being applied through multiple channels, designed to isolate me from support systems, while making compliance with family demands appear reasonable and necessary for holiday celebration participation. His business experience with coordinated influence campaigns provided relevant perspective on tactics being employed to overcome my resistance. Elena, your family has recruited extended relatives to apply pressure through seasonal emotions and cultural expectations that make your boundary maintenance appear selfish rather than protective of your emotional well-being, Marcus noted while helping me process Sophia's communication and similar appeals from other family members. This coordinated approach suggests significant investment in overcoming your resistance rather than genuine interest in healthy relationship repair. The approach to my family's inner sanctum required acknowledging that their love had always been conditional on my willingness to prioritize their comfort over my own authentic happiness, and that seasonal reunification attempts represented continuation of control patterns, rather than genuine transformation of their relationship approach. The Christmas invitation served as final test of whether I would choose family approval over marriage protection, when pressure was applied through cultural and emotional channels that made resistance appear unreasonable. The decision to maintain boundaries during holiday season, despite extended family pressure and seasonal expectations, represented crossing the threshold from accommodation-based relationship management to authentic self-determination that prioritized healthy connections over conditional approval systems. This choice would establish precedents for future holiday seasons while demonstrating commitment to marriage protection over family reunion at any cost. The inner sanctum of family dynamics revealed core beliefs about love, loyalty, and relationship hierarchy that had shaped my understanding of acceptable behavior throughout my adult life, requiring fundamental reevaluation of principles that had guided previous decision-making about family obligations versus individual autonomy and partnership protection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.